first grade, I remember that my teacher was a lot more harsh on me than my classmates, even though we'd be like talking the same amount or engaging in the same kind of like, childish antics or whatever. And I remember that I remember it was called the island. And I was the only person who would have to go on the island. And that meant like she put my desk next to her desk and then I'd have to sit there all day, not being able to sit with the group of people. That was one of my first experiences where I felt like something was unfair. I don't know, she probably just thought I was a bit more of a troublemaker than everybody else, when in actuality, I remember vividly feeling like things were pretty equal and I wasn't doing anything more or less than anyone else. 7th grade, I had a teacher who sent me to detention for chewing gum, even though everybody else was chewing gum. I remember she would always be like, Myles, you can't sleep in class, but I just have my head down and I would be reading like under the table to rest my head. And she would just be so much more strict with me than everybody else. And I remember there was this one classmate I had in 8th grade, because she was my teacher in 7th grade. In 8th grade, he was like, yeah, I think she was kind of bogus to you. Like, or she was, being unfair. And I remember I was like, really? And he was like, yeah, like, I don't think that she was treating you the same as everybody else. Then in 8th grade, I had a teacher she was my science teacher. One day my shoulder hurt. I was literally just like, moving it around, trying to pop it. I think it felt like there was like a little, air bubble or whatever in there. And I was moving it and she just kind of stopped class and said, Myles, you're distracting everyone. Go sit in the back of the class. And I was like, what? Like, I was like, and then I actually tried to like, and I was like, oh no, like, cause I thought it was a misunderstanding. I was like, oh, I'm just trying to crack my shoulder. And she's like, oh yeah, sure you are. I think you're just trying to distract everyone. And I was like, okay. But that was not the case. In 2nd grade, I had a teacher who called my mom so often. Like, she'd call home to complain about my behavior in class, even though I really wasn't doing much. To be honest with you, I don't recall why she would call my mom so often that my mom told me not to worry about her anymore, because it was getting to the point where it was just like nothing. So my mom would sit there and listen to her, but then she just, I'd come home and she'd be like, yeah, don't worry about her. She's just, being ridiculous, I guess. So, and what's really interesting, I think, is that when you're growing up and you're in these situations, you're not perceiving things as they are. You're perceiving them from your level of awareness and perception. And I think that allows for a lot of things to slide because you don't have a, understanding of what's happening yet. And then what happens is, like, because you're allowing that kind of behavior and unfair treatment, you're developing like thought patterns and processes that are influenced by those unfair treatments, right? So you start to think, and even if it's not in the forefront of your mind and it's a little bit more like subconscious, it's kind of like, oh, I'm a problem. My presence is a problem. And I know that now as a grown, I'm 21 now, and I go to the store and people look at me, and I'm dressed fine. I got I don't look, disheveled. I feel like my presentation is pretty solid or standard. I'm more than aware of how my presence is being like perceived by others in a way that I don't know is necessary for people who aren't Black, especially in like America.
In 8th grade, there was a day I remember specifically. It was during our lunch period. We were able to either go down to the cafeteria and have lunch, or we were able to stay in our homeroom and get work done, just as like a study period. I remember this day in particular. I think that for our social studies class, we had some sort of project that we were piecing together. I remember there being a lot of confusion amongst me and my peers about, how to do it. So a lot of us just tried to get things, just get something turned in rather than face getting a demerit, which is a slip you then have to take home to your parents, and then they have to sign it, so they get a slip saying, oh yeah, he didn't do his homework last night. So before lunch, I believe we had class, and she said that a lot of us really didn't do much of the assignment. I guess she could tell that we didn't put much effort into it. So we're in the homeroom. I'm in the back of the classroom where my desk is. And there's about a handful of people up there, in the classroom getting this same assignment done. And, over this period, she's coming in with papers that she's reading, that people are giving her. And she's coming back and saying, this isn't right. You didn't even whatever. you need to fix it, you know, and she's handing them off back to people. She's sitting it on their desk or she's handing it to them in their hands, you know. And this is just kind of happening, you know, leave out, come back in with a new paper, leave out, come back in with a new paper. You know, like I said, she's saying what's wrong, sitting it on their desk, handing it to them in their hands. And then she comes back in to give me my paper. And I can see her just kind of like quickly, like kind of fast walking up to me through the room, you know, and not looking at me at all, just kind of like looking down, you know, and she walks up and she says, yeah, this isn't right, you know, you're not even doing what you're supposed to do, you need to fix it. And then I'm reaching out, you know, to take the paper from her. Again, she's not looking at me at all. And once she says, you know, you still haven't done it right, you need to fix it, she kind of just tosses it in the air, you know, like she's close to my desk. So it's like, you could easily set it down. My hand is out to receive the paper. You could have just put it in my hand, you know, but then she tosses it in the air. And I'm kind of just sitting there, like, looking at her. She's walking back out the room. And I just, like, you know, take a second, like, man, my teacher really just threw a paper at me, you know. Just to give some context, the school is predominantly white. You know, I could say 95% white, you know, and have somebody throw a paper, what felt like in my face, it just felt unnecessary, disrespectful, you know, but I kept cool about it, picked the paper up, and got back to work. And that's my story.
Any response was to just throw us out of class. It was no debate or like warning. It was just get out. And they usually just sent other students to like a room. I think it was like called SSR or something like that. It was like a room, and they just pretty much isolated us and just made us sit in a room, and we couldn't talk, couldn't do anything but do our work. So yeah, there was no. I remember with like a lot of white students too. They would think their behavior is like quirky or funny, or like their disrespect could be tolerated, but to us it was no. I remember a white student was making fun of our Hispanic teacher during his lessons, and I feel like the Hispanic, he knew the teacher, he knew that it was like flat out racism and that it wasn't funny. But then when he called like a higher power to come in and intervene, he just kind of brushed it off, and it was just like, oh, just have him continue to sit in your class. We'll tell him to be quiet, and then his behavior continued after that. And it was just kind of something that we'd all just had to watch. I mean, of course, people like tried to tell him to shut up, but you know how it is with kids. So it's an example. And then I talked about earlier about how it was my math class, and we were just kind of, I don't know. Me and my friends were joking around, so obviously teachers don't like that during their lessons, but my friend specifically, she was just like laughing really loud. She obviously didn't like this teacher, so she made it very well known that she was laughing loud and that the jokes were funny and that her lesson was not it. And I can understand how that would be frustrating to a teacher, but I think it crossed the line when the teacher just straight up just said like, "I will call the police," and we just kind of all looked at her like, we were confused. We were just like, what? Like, there's no reason for that. Especially when the simple answer I feel like to that would just tell us to quiet down, you know. Obviously, like when a white person says that they're gonna call the police, that's when you shut up, because you no, there's no, we don't even want to risk that possibility. But yeah, my friend was just, we were just silent, and we just kind of all looked at her because it was like directed towards my friend, and she was just like, "I will call the police," and we were just like, "Okay, we're gonna be quiet." And of course, you know, we weren't perfect, and I will admit that we were being disruptive, but it should never ever have to come to that, you know.
What was that? Oh, was there a reason why she didn't like that teacher?
I think probably just because of just racist behavior. I feel like the "I will call the police" comment too really just confirmed it for us. But you kind of feel like, you know, when someone doesn't like you, or it is. I just feel like the teacher had this attitude towards us, and we could just kind of tell, And she always had attitude, and we like wanted to like ask her questions, or like she was very short with us, especially my friend. And my friend was definitely very outspoken, very assertive. So, when that situation happened, she was not gonna let her feelings go without notice. So. Right.
Yeah, I went to, from elementary school on, I went to dang near all black elementary school up until like fourth grade, when I lived in Houston. And so I had black teachers all through elementary school, and I never really noticed. Like, I was always a good kid in class. Like, I tried to keep my grades up. Was low key like a teacher's pet, but like on the side. And then when I moved to San Antonio in fifth grade, I had a white teacher for the first time, and I think like that was the most memorable experience I had, because you know how when you're in fifth grade, everybody has like your little friend groups, and you only talk to the people that are in your class. You don't associate with the other classes like during recess and stuff like that. So I had obviously my little girl group of 9 and 10-year-olds in fifth grade, and I think we were just getting into just like regular girl drama, regular girl arguments over just like boys or whatever. And it was 5 of us at the time in my friend group, and we would have to have meetings with our teacher all the time, just because we would be like fighting in class or just like have attitudes toward each other. I don't know. But I was the only one, and this was going on for like 6 months in fifth grade. I was the only one who was routinely getting called down to the counselor's office, and they were asking me if I came from like an aggressive childhood, if like there was stuff going on at home that could lead me to be super mean towards other kids, and like if something was going on at home to make me be like insinuating that I was like a bully in this situation, because my teacher at the time like would only tell them about me, like counselors and principals and things like that. My parents even had to come up to the school multiple times to sit down with my principal and my teacher, because she'd be like, yeah, Kaidyn is having attitude problems in classes. She's really rude to the rest of her friends. But I don't even really think it was like that. And at the time, I was like, okay, maybe this is like a big deal, and maybe I am being mean to these people. But my parents were not mad at me, and I didn't get in trouble with my parents. It was literally just the teacher. And she kind of peered into like my whole home life just because of, I guess, her saying that. And the rest of the girls in the like friend group that I had were also white girls, so they'd complain to the teacher, she'd hear that, and then yeah, that I think was the most memorable experience I've had with like a white teacher, because it was the first one I'd ever had, and I felt like she was just always targeting me. And then throughout the year, because it started happening towards the beginning of the year, but throughout the year I would get like singled out when we would do group activities sometimes, just because she'd be like, I don't know if you're ready to work with people yet. And I had my desk as an island, is what she would call it, but it's just like my desk was separate from everybody else's in the class. So that was interesting. And I had also just moved 3 hours away. So the school was new, but like a lot of the kids had already known each other and had been to this elementary school, but I had just got there. So I don't know. I felt real singled out just because of the assumptions that she made about me, and how like she only thought to discipline me, only thought to come for my life and involve my parents and administration, when she didn't do that for other girls' parents. It was literally just me.
I had a few run-ins with administration in regards to my hair when I was at Mount Carmel my freshman year. I want to say around 2015, 2016. So, of course, every school has rules they want you to follow and all of that. So at Carmel, we couldn't have our hair over 2 inches, and we also couldn't have tapers, which was a tad odd to me. And their reasoning was it doesn't look presentable. That was kind of off-putting to me, but that's neither here nor there. So I remember I was late. I was a few minutes late to school one day, so of course you got to go to the office and get a late slip. And the lady sitting there was, oh, you need to get your hair trimmed. And then she made me like duck my head all the way down. It was like, oh no, you need to go back upstairs, pick your hair out, and then come back down. And that was kind of embarrassing for me, to say the least. And like the dean would be in his office cutting people's hairs, not even lining them up. Mind you, since we couldn't have our hair over 2 inches, it was mostly black students getting their hair cut. And it was easier for white students to get away with that because they can slick their hair down a lot easier than we can. So it looks like their hair is under 2 inches when it's really not. So I feel like at a lot of private Chicago schools, the rules are kind of tailor-made for us to be punished more. Whether it's intentional or not is a different story, but it's a little bit off-putting. And yeah, that was my experience.
I've actually come to remember this story very vividly as the times went on. It's just one instance that I vividly remember from my elementary school years. It was 6th grade in math class, and our teacher, Mrs. Cochran, had stepped out to take a phone call, I believe, or meet with someone. I don't exactly remember why. But at that time in our class, we had a thing where we used to throw around pink pearl like erasers, or the erasers that you stick on the back of pencils when your pencil eraser nub gets too small or anything of that nature. And we would take these and we would throw them at each other and try not to get caught as like a little game, because we were, young back then and naive. So me and my friend, I'll call him Timothy for now. Me and Timothy were throwing them at these two of our other classmates. And we were just throwing it back and forth and trying to hit each other. Before she came back in, we heard the door open. By that time, me and Timothy were already in motion to throw them. As we walked back in, she could see both of our follow throughs and the erasers flying throughout the room. She got really upset at both of us at the time, which obviously we knew we would be in trouble because throwing erasers is obviously a hazard in the classroom. So from that point on, she came in, she yelled at us, she took him out of the room and came back in, and then she took me out of the room, and she had said, "You could have hurt the young girl who I threw it at, and you should be ashamed of yourself, and this is not what we do in school." And then she had told me my punishment, which was I would have detention after school. So I'm like, okay, that's fine. And then she told me that I would have to call my parents and tell them what I did and why I would be staying after school. Which is weird because I do not remember Timothy coming back in and calling his parents or any of that nature. And she took me into the classroom where everyone could hear my conversation and everyone could hear what was going on, and stood by me, and everyone listened as I told my parents why I was in trouble and what had happened. And after the phone call, I had expected her to do the same thing to Timothy as well, but she didn't. So I was confused on that note, but at the same time, I realized, okay, we both have detention. I show up to detention after school, and I realize it's just me, not Timothy. So now I'm confused why I, as a young black child, was the only one in the classroom full of people that are not the same color as me, why I was the only one who got the punishment when we were both in the wrong. But that's just the one instance I remember, because it kind of stood out to me that I was not only punished, but was the only one embarrassed by making that phone call to my parents while everyone could sit and listen. And that's one instance from elementary school that I remember.
I've had a teacher publicly embarrass me. I've had a braid fall out in class and not realize it. And because I was part of student government, this teacher had my phone number. And she texted me letting me know that my hair fell out and my extension fell out. And she sent a picture of it, and I apologized, and I was incredibly embarrassed. And she made a joke at me and said that it was fine, and I assumed that it was fine. And later I returned the next day with the extension that fell out of my hair on display and not thrown away like I expected the teacher to do. I would be called an attention whore, and I would constantly be with the same teacher would had chewed me out in front of the whole entire class and basically told me that the only reason I was befriending certain people in the class was because everyone else did not like me, and would say this in front of everyone in the school. She had a lot of power at the school and had a lot of power if you got into programs that would help you get into college, and made sure that I was no longer part of those programs. And for someone that went to a school that didn't really teach, or someone who grew up in an environment where none of us really knew how to apply for colleges and did not have that surrounding us, the high school didn't really teach us that besides these specific programs. It is very damaging for your future if a teacher just randomly decides to not like you and kick you out of these programs, even if you didn't necessarily do anything wrong, just because a teacher decides that they don't like you for whatever reason. And to this day, I still do not know what that reason is, because for a very long time, I thought that me and this teacher were fine. And then she would do things like this to humiliate me. So I was forced to switch schools because it was just going to be better for me in the end. And that's my story.
All right, so yeah, I used to go to school in Rapids for a little bit, and I used to have this teacher. It's a couple stories actually.
Yeah.
But my 7th grade teacher, his name was Mr. Gleason. He's very eccentric, into nature, all that. And I remember we had we had a couple black kids up in there. It wasn't too many, but it was like at least 4. And then it was like a lot of like either white to mixed in ratio, if that kind of makes sense. And I remember like we have like reading time, and if like a black kid was taught, he'd be like, "Be quiet!" And we used to have this like point system where it was like you get 4 points, you get like this orange card, and it was like a big deal. It was like, oh, you got an orange card, you're bad, Mm-hmm. And he would have like, and it's weird. He would have like all the black kids. He would have like their names written on an orange card prior to class. So like if their marks went to 4, he just signed them off. And I remember one day we was in reading time, and like I looked over to my neighbor. I was like, because it's some little random stuff. I was just like, let's say, "How you doing?" I don't know. And he was like, "Myla, that's an orange card. Get out of here. Go sit in the hallway by yourself." I was like, "What did I do?" He's like, "You're talking." I'm like, "They talking over there too." He's like, "It don't matter. I said not to talk, and you talk. So get out." So that right there, I feel like that type of stuff, it definitely like impacts your mind. It's like, dang, like I can't talk. Like I'm just talking, Right. So that's some experience with that. A lot of the time, black teachers, like, they don't know how to discipline black students. They think they have to go all the way up, like, to the max. And it's messed up. And it's crazy, too, because I can relate to that defiant thing. It's like, I kind of see those words as, like, microaggressions, because It's like, or, like, disrespectful. I used to get the disrespectful one all the time, just for, like, simply standing up for myself. Like, somebody would say something, and I'd be like, well, that's not actually how it went. Like, and when I say somebody, teacher, and they'd be like, oh, you're disrespecting me, you're defying me. It's like, no, I'm telling you the truth of what it is. You may not see it like that, but that's how it is.
And then we had a math teacher who I would say was pretty problematic as well. She was much younger than this other instructor. And I remember making a joke one day. It wasn't really, a super crazy joke. Like, it was a joke to really offend anyone or anyhow. It's just like a small joke that I made. And I mean, students would make jokes all the time with her because she was very much open to that with some students, not all students. And here it is. I'm one of the only black students in the class, and or at least this math class. And I make a joke, and she instantly like blew up and wanted to send me to the office. But me, at this time, I was really, you know, I would say I was a pretty innocent student. If I ever caused a problem and not intentionally, like you know, I would apologize about it. And, I apologized to her when she like flipped off. But um, I thought it was kind of weird because whenever other students would make jokes, she wouldn't like get upset. However, this day, she just decided to snap on me. And despite the fact she was, in a great mood, prior to that moment, I didn't really understand that.
So from my experience in school, I grew up in an area that was kind of split, half black, half white. And something I had noticed was obviously like most of our teachers were actually all white. And since they were the ones kind of like, pulling the ropes, I kind of noticed that a lot of times they create hierarchies between the black students. So me growing up, I was mixed race, so I was kind of treated a little bit differently and often separated from my black peers, whether it be put on a pedestal or being taken down a couple notches. So that's one aspect of definitely having seen how they kind of separate us and create hierarchies within our own communities as black students, and kind of respectability, adding in like respectability politics into it, of like, okay, these are the black students who are allowed to kind of be within our social settings, who we can give respect and privileges to, versus the black students who we kind of push aside and don't give as many opportunities to, and treat with bias and prejudice. I went to school in the South my first year, and it was definitely like a complete divide between like black students and white students. White teachers definitely treated black students with like a sense of like white guilt, I would say, and didn't like it kind of got weird to a certain extent, where they kind of treated like everything a black student did was like super duper, like they didn't treat black students as though they were neutral. It was always like if a black student did something, there was always some underlying aspect of like protest or politics into it. And it was never like the black student was creating, especially in arts, they weren't ever just creating. The best way to put it is from a neutral stance. It was always like, okay, they're creating this because they're black and there's nothing else to it. So it was never like them really giving black students a chance to be like artists beyond just their race, and they're actually adding that aspect of their humanity where they have the privilege of diverse thought. And how that kind of affected me was that a lot of times I always felt like I had to, I guess, walk on eggshells in how I presented myself, because while I appreciate the nuance that my racial background and my community gives me, there are times when I don't think everything that I do is purely related to my blackness or my racial background. Sometimes I really do just think, and I, along with my other black peers, we really do just think in terms of other things. We don't always, our race does add nuance, but we can create neutral stories, using the word neutral very loosely. But we can create neutral stories and art without it being purely based around our race. And I think a lot of times white professors, they always want to add the racial aspect of it because they don't see us beyond blackness. And so in my mode of creating, I think at one point I kind of like fell into that trap of being like, okay, how do I create without, like, under these circumstances that I know my professors aren't gonna think about it from any other standpoint of, okay, this is a student of color who's creating something, let me think about it from how I want to, if that makes sense. Or like, do I just overdo it and basically just be like the blackest I can be to kind of like appease them, or because I think that's the only way my work is going to make sense to anyone. And slowly I've kind of like had to learn how to like find the balance between like using my racial background as inspiration to add nuance, and not letting it fully control all my narratives, so I can create art that relates to different people, but still holds true and provides the nuance that is given to me by my racial background. So it is definitely one of those things where, like, it has kind of sucked that I've had to, like, I couldn't fully, like, create neutrally in different ways. Like I always wanted to. I had to go through the process of, like, walking on eggshells, or, like, kind of going back and forth with what I enjoyed doing, or having to feel like I was kind of, like, not letting down my race, if that makes sense, and, like, not trying to be someone I'm not. So it's been a process, and it's still a learning process, but I do think it allows you that kind of struggle of having to be like, okay, who am I? How does my identity actually add to what I'm doing and what I have to say? So it's a learning process, but it's one that definitely requires some introspection.